All right. Now for this, all that I did here was in this particular model, I just tried to give you an indication of how we can interpret the cryptocurrency price and how we can interpret, the relation of cryptocurrencies with normal fiat currency in order to finance some portions of your consumption. What I will now want to do is I want to present to you a model which uses, tries to think about a fundamental analysis to try to pin down a value for the Bitcoin price. Now there's a few out there, and the one that I like the best is by Emiliano Pagnotta from Imperial College London, and I hope that I get this right in terms of how I describe the model. If you're interested, Emiliano has his own videos online, and so you can compare what he says about his model to what I say, where I try to summarize his particular paper in just 8 minutes or so. So let's go with it. So the model that I look out is Bitcoin as decentralized money. And the way to think about it is as follows. The price of the cryptocurrency derives from the security that the miners provide. So the idea being that the more securities miners provide, the more valuable the item itself is. Now, how do the miners provide security? Well, they provide security by the hashing power. So that's the computational power that they put into securing the network. So let's go with this miners problem for a second. I'm using a little bit of math, and this is a very short version of the paper. So the network has a security which is a function of the hash rate. So what the miners choose is the hash rate h. When they successfully mine a block, they get a reward, and the reward is paid in the internal currency. So that is an important component of it, so that you effectively as a miner have skin in the game. So the expected project benefit, therefore, is proportional to the security that you provide, which is the hashing power. So now in general equilibrium, this is the way it works. You pick a security, right? That will determine, you pick the mining power H. That provides a certain level of security, and that determines then what the value of the future Bitcoin is, which then again determines how much hashing power you're going to put in, because the value of the Bitcoin is essentially the reward that you get. And so the higher the value of the Bitcoin, the more hashing powers you're going to put in, the larger is the amount of security that you're willing to put in, the higher is the Bitcoin price. And so there is obviously, there's not obviously, but there's a question of whether or not this can be a system which can create an equilibrium with a positive value of the Bitcoin in the long run, if you want. So in other words, the equilibrium price will be a function of network effects, right? So people use it, of risk aversion. So how worried are you that your Bitcoins get stolen, of the technology, which determines the hash rate and the cost of the hash rate, and in some form also of the money supply. So how many coins are being created, what's the degree of dilution, and the general regime that you have. And let me try to explain the different components here. Now, one of the key points though, and the key concepts that he uses, is that what he refers to as a unity token. And what a unity token is that you have both a means of exchange and also as an incentive for the miners that is being paid. Now, for a network to work in this particular model, for it to apply, this is critical. So let's take a few examples. You have the DTCC. This is the basically Deposit and Clearing Corporation, which just looks at the transfers of assets. So the question that he asks is, so what is the network size and the capacity of the people who can contribute to security? And then there's a question of whether or not the payment mechanism, or the item that is being transferred, is also the unit of account, right? The unit of exchange in this network. Or rather, if it is also paid as an incentive. So in the DTCC, that's not the case, right? Because what is transferred is public equity, and the DTCC does not get paid in public equity. If you look at Bitcoin, of course, that is exactly what it is. So first, it's open, there's multiple number of verifiers, and you get paid in the native token. The same holds for Ethereum. Now let's look at Ethereum tokens. So those are tokens, items, assets that are created on top of the Ethereum chain. For the transfers of those, you still have multiple verifiers. So you still have free entry into the market of arranging these transfers. But the ESRC20 tokens are not fundamentally the incentive that is being paid. So if you want to assess the value of ERC20 tokens, this model is not applicable. And then there's also another token, which is Ripple. Ripple is again based on a network. It's also a blockchain-based token, but there you have basically a known network of verifiers, and so they don't get paid. So therefore, this is not a Unity token. All right. Now the way the model works is very simply, it's an overlapping generation model. That's the last one. In generation T, there's a new generation that buys goods and services in Bitcoin and has wants to deal with the miners. Now, within period T and T+1, there could be an attack on the network. And so the attack on the network is always possible, but the probability of it being successful depends on the hashing power, so the security that the miners provide. And then in period T+1, the old generation, formerly young, now old generation sells the Bitcoins to the younger generation and consumes all its goods. So this is a very standard process of how we operate with this. Now the objective function here for a user is that they want to maximize the transactional services and the retail value of the token, which is a function with multiplied with the network security, means basically the probability that the network is around one period into the future. And then there's, of course, a cost associated with that. So now there are, what's the benchmark here? Now the benchmark that Emiliano chooses to describe is one where basically there is no internal payment mechanism. So you basically get paid in something where the underlying has nothing to do with it. You get paid basically in cryptocurrency. And the problem with that is essentially no matter how you structure the network, there's the only equilibrium of the price for the cryptocurrency here is one which is unstable, right? So so that means because you have no skin in the game effectively, and whatever equilibrium with a positive price that you have, any small deviation in the balances that people hold will make this network fail. Okay. Now, if you do have the Unity tokens in place, so people have skin in the game, there's always an equilibrium in which the price of the network of the native tokens is zero, but you can show that there are, and so this is essentially, it's just like the supply curve of security, and the cost curve. So where would they intersect? And you can see that there is multiple equilibria. There's stable equilibria and unstable equilibria. And you can see down here, there's one stable equilibrium, which just means basically there is a certain level of holdings that people have, and that gives rise to a certain degree of skin in the game, and therefore the miners are willing to provide the hashing power, and then they get paid in the tokens, and that basically makes them be willing to provide the hashing power, that means the security in the future. So now what Emiliano then describes, and this is, there's a lot of subtleties here that I'm skipping over, but it matters how many people are in the network, because that determines the probability of you winning the prize, and therefore determines the value of the hashing power that you provide for you in the future. And so what he shows is there is a smallest network that has a positive price, and where the price is stable and above zero. So this is really the question of how few miners do we need for this actually to work. All right, so he has some comparative static results. Generally speaking, that if you increase the number of miners, the total hash rate will increase, and therefore also the price will increase. So the mining process and people being part of this network is actually self-reinforcing, despite possible competition effects. The more people there are, the higher the network security, the higher the price, the more attractive it is to you, your mining. If the number of miners goes to infinity, there is still, however, a finite limit price. And there's actually a well-determined price for minting the tokens. So this is actually an interesting part about it, right? Because you see, there has to be a certain critical quantity or critical mass in terms of to get the network going. But if the network grows without bounds, so if everybody is involved in it, that doesn't mean that the price will be infinitely large. There is still a finite price, right? Now he has also some work on a monetary policy rate. So essentially what you do is when you create the hashing power, or if you create the new blocks, in return what you generate is you mint new tokens, so that leads to inflation. So he has thought very carefully about the different rates at which these Coinbase, at which, so how the Coinbase rewards, so it means how the inflation rate determines the price of the cryptocurrency. And so you can see that there is a certain threshold for the inflation rate, for keeping everything else constant, so that when the inflation rate is lower than this, the price will be increasing as you increase the inflation rate. But then at some point you reach a point where the price, the rate is such that if you increase the inflation rate further, so the block creation rate any further, then the price will actually drop, right? Because it's just too much money in the system, and that lowers the price. So what you want to make sure is that you are, not that you don't have an inflation rate where you cause the price to drop, because that affects then the network security rate that people are willing to put in. So this is a relatively complicated and complex model. The take home is, however, is that there is in fact an equilibrium price which can be stable and which is larger than zero, and which is essentially driven by the fact that the miners provide network security. So there's an internal general equilibrium which creates a positive price, and where then fundamental value is provided to people by just wanting to have the tokens and pay their consumption in it. And that's what I have for now.